Hey, DNA. It's a new episode of All Access DNA, and I'm your host, Kate Wilson. We are talking to Greg Ruff, him, about dilated cardiomyopathy or DCM. Greg is the executive director of the DCM Foundation. He founded this organization after he was diagnosed with the disease and found he has a genetic mutation linked to DCM. Greg had heart failure and a heart transplant in 2021. Dilated cardiomyopathy is a heart condition where the left ventricle of the heart becomes enlarged and weakened. This means that the heart cannot get blood efficiently to the rest of the body. Some DCM happens due to viral infection, autoimmune disease, or other outside factors. About 20 to 40% are due to a gene change or a mutation that can run in families. However, only a small percent of individuals who have dilated cardiomyopathy actually undergo genetic testing. Greg and the DCM Foundation are bringing needed awareness and resources to the community affected by DCM. We discuss his experience, the challenges in care, and warning signs of dilated cardiomyopathy. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Greg. Thanks for being here.
Kate, thanks for having me.
So I wanted you on to chat about a few different things as it relates to cardiomyopathy, patient advocacy. But I guess, starting at the beginning, what is dilated cardiomyopathy?
Yeah, so dilated cardiomyopathy is a disease of the heart. It's a heart muscle disease. So basically what happens with dilated cardiomyopathy, it's a subset of cardiomyopathy. Again, muscle heart disease is essentially what it stands for. Dilated, our type of cardiomyopathy, actually is where the heart weakens. The heart gets bigger, more elastic, it weakens, and essentially it prevents, the heart from being able to pump enough blood to over time as it gets worse to maintain so that you can live a normal lifestyle. And to the point it can continue to fail into heart failure where, potentially you may not be able to survive with that heart.
Okay, so it's sort of a weakening of the muscles that then could eventually lead to very serious issues, complications.
Correct. It's when the heart weakens, you get something called heart failure, which again, there's all types of heart failure from different diseases. It could be obesity, heart attack, muscle damage. But it causes heart failure. And progressively, the less easy it is for your heart to pump blood to the body, the more challenging life gets for those people.
Got it. Makes sense. And so I know you're the executive director, founder of the Dilated Cardiomyopathy Foundation. So tell us how you got involved with that organization.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed with the disease genetic dilated cardiomyopathy in 2014 and was being treated. And one of my doctors had been a multiple decade researcher, and he actually had a genetic counselor, Anna Morales, that I know, Kate, and he knew that I'd sort of started several businesses, built them and sold them. Then he said, Greg, that there are probably over 1 million people in the United States, or over 1 million people in the United States with dilated cardiomyopathy. There was no patient group to represent them, to provide information, to provide support, provide help. I mean, there are a lot of disease states with 3 people that have organizations, right? It was shocking to me that there was no group to support it. And this was in 2017. And really at the end of 2017, beginning 2018, I started the DCM Foundation, created the 501(c)(3). I live in Columbus, Ohio, here. And then I funded it for the first several years personally to get it rolling. And our first foray, really from 2018 to 2020, was to put together a really great website to explain the disease. Because when I was diagnosed in 2014, I think that launched 2019, the website. When I was diagnosed in 2014, there was no good information on the web. And so we still have, by far the deepest, best website on dilated cardiomyopathy in the world. And so that was our sort of first foray into this. And then we've done a lot of other things since then too. So
Hmm. So it's kind of started out as awareness education, but I think you're moving into a lot of other areas and trying to beyond just like making people know about dilated cardiomyopathy, but treatment potentially.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess the areas that I could talk about that we sort of take under our wing, information education, which is great. Obviously, the website, and we have 300 people a day come visit our website, so that adds up over time. You see our website. We have both English and Spanish versions of the website. We think it's really important because we have such a large Hispanic community, and we're totally devoted to health equity in the United States. We also get quite a few people from South America on that because there's just, again, not good Spanish websites on the disease. And about 25% of our traffic actually comes from, they click on the Spanish version of the website and read through it. So we're really excited about that. So we have information education, the website. We do monthly webinars, and we'll get 150 to 500 people registering for our webinars on a monthly basis. Really, really good.
Great.
We've got we have a dilated cardiomyopathy Facebook group, a public and a private. Some people like to be in either. Over 10,000 people in that right now. A lot of social media. Into the millions, some things that we do. So we have a mailing list of folks. They're not officially members, but they've agreed to be on our mailing list. We'll loosely call them members, about 6,500 people. So in the last, really 2020, 2024 is when we've really focused on trying to do our outreach. So I think we made a, fairly good progress in that time. And then we also do, patient support groups. We do a lot of support. We're focusing more of our support groups on gene-specific groups because about half of our disease has a genetic cause. And people like it's hard to create 7 p.m. Wednesday Eastern time meetings, whether it's virtual or in person. The world's changed. They like interacting with people on 24/7 and through social media outlets. And so these Facebook groups are great because they also like to be associated with someone that has the same gene. Because many times the manifestation of the disease may be similar if you have certain, similar genetic mutations. And so we're focusing heavily on that. And the third piece we can talk a little bit more about is we're really focusing on the genetics of this. And we put a group together called the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium of 8 patient groups in our space, including the DCM Foundation. We have our own website, geneticcardiomyopathy.org. Really focusing on the awareness of genetics in our disease, not only in dilated cardiomyopathy, but also hypertrophic arrhythmogenic left ventricular non-compaction and restrictive.
Okay. So dilated cardiomyopathy is this umbrella term. There's different kind of variations under it. You mentioned it's about half tends to be genetic or have a genetic cause. So does that mean that those cases are hereditary or run in families?
Yeah, they do. So the vast majority of that would be inherited or hereditary, autosomal dominant, which I won't get into that because nobody's going to understand what that means. But, so if your parent one of your parents had the gene mutation that could cause dilated cardiomyopathy or cardiomyopathy. So under our GCAC, it's not only dilated cardiomyopathy, we deal with all types. So we call it genetic cardiomyopathy at that point. There's about 60 genes involved that they've identified so far that could cause cardiomyopathy. And so if one of your parents has that, you have a 50-50 shot of passing that on to a child. It doesn't always work that way, but that's if you tested 1 million people, the number would be about 500,000. And so, and again, most of it, some of it's spontaneous. There are times where someone's gene mutates. It wasn't inherited, but that doesn't happen very often. It's almost all inherited.
And so you had talked about that you were diagnosed with the genetic form of dilated cardiomyopathy. How did they diagnose you, or how did you figure out that's what was going on?
It was interesting. And really in this disease, in a lot of disease states, it actually goes undiagnosed or misdiagnosed for a long time. So we hear that. I mean, the vast majority of the patients we talk to are misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. How many diseases are like that? We're not alone in that for a lot of reasons. But so it was 2014 that I was formally diagnosed. I started having ventricular tachycardia events when I was running track in high school, and my docs, like, they didn't know what caused it or anything, but they said, you shouldn't run in college. So I didn't run in college. I actually had some issues. I was getting a Keyman life insurance policy for one of my businesses in 2003. And they said, there's some issues with your heart. I went to a cardiologist and he said, you've got a big heart. And, I guess probably figuratively, not literally, or literally not figuratively. And that I had a reduced ejection fraction, which means my heart, and ejection fraction is your left ventricle where the blood pumps from the heart to the body. Normal heart, you would pump about 60% on average, the blood in your heart out to your body each beat. When you get a muscle heart, disease like dilated cardiomyopathy, that decreases and normally decreases over time. So mine was about 35% in 2003, which is a lot lower than 60%, right, on average. And so, but they didn't do anything because I was healthy, I was active, I didn't look sick, I didn't feel sick. And then I was formally diagnosed in 2014. I was at my allergist. He's like, Mr. Ruff, your heart rate is 32 and very arrhythmatic, which means I was having, rhythm issues with my problem. He said, I'm going to call the squad. And I said, I'll be fine. But then I went home and went to Cleveland Clinic and was diagnosed there. So,
wow. So was your going into your allergist was the person that kind of picked it up and said, hey, we need to.
Just doing my pulse. I mean, you get checked in for a medical appointment. They do your blood pressure, your pulse, right? And he's like, dude, you're in trouble here. I'm like, I'm fine. Pass me another beer. Sorry.
Well, I think that's partly, I'm guessing that's maybe why it contributes to maybe being underdiagnosed, is either people don't recognize the symptoms, or maybe it's not picked up by somebody that knows kind of how to refer on. So you mentioned things like the ejection fraction or pulse rate. Are there other symptoms or things that people should look out for?
Yeah. Dilated cardiomyopathy or cardiomyopathy in general, those two things, it affects the heart muscle to pump. So you're going to become more tired, get winded. Life gets more challenging. But again, as we all age, I'm a little out of shape. I might have put on a few pounds. I mean, I'm getting older. How does an XYZ age person feel, right? It's squishy, right? Not all of us have days we feel like crap when we get tired walking up the steps, right? So it's pretty squishy. The other big component of this, and I didn't mention before, is the arrhythmias. So in cardiomyopathy and dilated cardiomyopathy, you can actually create arrhythmias, and they tend to be what we'd call AFib. We hear about a lot, or it's also called atachycardia, where the atriums start beating irregularly, normally more quickly, and can cause some issues. And with that, it can cause stroke. So a lot of people have AFib and they're fine. They go on blood thinners and are monitored by an Apple Watch or something and are fine. The other piece is ventricular tachycardia, which is where your ventricles start beating real fast. And that can actually cause sudden cardiac death if it continues. If they go out of rhythm, they start beating really quickly and it doesn't stop, or sustained ventricular tachycardia that can be called ventricular fibrillation. You can die from it. So there's two, the muscle and then also these arrhythmias, which can cause both. And with the arrhythmias, do you know you had them? Like, I didn't know. Like, I thought I was getting panic attacks, right? Because the signs and the symptoms are pretty similar, and so I've gotten a number of these. I'm like, it's just a panic attack. I'm, whatever. But it was actually ventricular fibrillation. So,
well, and I think, one of the things that my specialty is not cardio, but is that sometimes the only sign is that there has been somebody in the family, unfortunately, that did pass away from sudden heart failure, or what seemed to be sudden heart failure. Yeah,
it is, and it's interesting. And again, I'll get on my soapbox and scream and yell and shout and cuss. But that's a huge issue, and that's why we created the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium, www.geneticcardiomyopathy.org, because that is a great way to predict potential onset of disease, is by identifying people with a genetic mutation. And it's just not happening. So, we say people that are diagnosed with non-ischemic or idiopathic, which means I didn't know where your cardiomyopathy came from, right? So other would be chronic high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. And then a huge one is if someone has a heart attack and there's muscle damage, they now have cardiomyopathy, right? So that's ischemic. We know what caused it. We know you had these things that caused your heart to go bad. Non-ischemic, which means or idiopathic, is we don't know where it came from. That's about 50%. Most of those people most likely have a genetic cause of their cardiomyopathy. So almost up to 50% of the people that have cardiomyopathy probably have a genetic cause of some sort. The American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and the Heart Failure Society of America guidelines are that if you're diagnosed with non-ischemic or idiopathic cardiomyopathy, the best course of treatment is you should get genetically tested. It's just not happening. Only 1% of the people actually get genetically tested. It's huge. It's terrible. It's criminal, in my opinion. It's awful, in our opinion. And so, in my opinion. And so, so that's why we created, awareness to patients, to cardiologists. And there's a lot of reasons that's not happening, but we're really focusing on trying to close that gap, because if your mother or father knew they had a genetic mutation that could potentially cause their muscle to go bad in their heart or cause dangerous arrhythmias, the child is going to get tested and then followed as a genetic counselor. That the cascade testing of the family, and that could save, many, many lives. Because a lot of people are dying, I'm using quotation marks, of a heart attack, which nobody just says they died of it. They just died of cancer, right? But people just have a heart attack, and society and the medical community is just okay with it because people just die of heart attacks, right? How many of those people had arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy that died of sudden cardiac death, a heart attack, right? Ventricular fibrillation, and they never knew it. How many of their kids are at risk right now? And I've talked to some device companies that put that number up to 100,000 people a year.
Wow.
People that have genetic cardiomyopathy that die of a, air quote, heart attack that actually die of sudden cardiac death. It potentially could have been prevented because of genetic testing. And then your kids will be followed and monitored so that if they see the first signs of the disease onset, they could be saved. So by really getting more people tested, in the end, we would save millions of lives. Immediately, you could save 100,000 lives a year, right?
So. Yeah, well, because you're saying 99% of people are being found, right? They're not getting tested.
It's not getting tested, and they're supposed to. The guidelines say you should be tested.
And why do you think that is compared to, say, something like hereditary cancer, right? So we think about BRCA, we think about Angelina Jolie. I will say, like, every time I go to my physician's office, I fill out a form and they ask me questions specific about cancer. But I don't see as many questions probably about heart health or family history of heart health.
How real do you want me to be here?
Go ahead. Go for it.
Oh.
It's fine. Go for it.
She's seen me in board meetings before. I can't tell her that's I got to be careful. I get myself in trouble or sued. I think so. I think that we are 10 to 15 years behind cancer, right? And I also think that there is in the medical community and also in the general community at large, heart disease is often seen as your fault. You're overweight, you're lazy, you eat poorly, right? So I think the prevalence of the disease has been it's your fault, right? And so they don't think about genetics. And I think because of that, the medical community still looks like that. And it's not unfair that they do, right? I mean, how many times I went in, my heart was failing. I was always fit, never overweight, always very fit, always ate well, no cholesterol issues, no high blood pressure. And probably every time I went to the doctor's appointment hospital, a nurse would say to me, "You don't look like a heart failure patient," right? So that's a piece of it. So, and all the drugs have been developed and people were able to make a lot of money from is, again, low cholesterol, lower blood pressure, lose weight, right? Those are the things. And they're big drugs, multi-billion-dollar drugs. I think the other thing is that, as I understand with genetic oncology or cancer, at some point a reimbursement or accreditation organization basically said in order to get like full reimbursement or to be accredited at a certain high level, you have to do so much genetic testing. So it basically was going to hurt the medical centers in the pocket if they didn't do it, so they were forced to do it. That hasn't happened in cardiology, and I think that needs to happen. And I also think talking with people that have been in oncology, preneonatal, and now they're in cardiology, in general, cardiologists really believe that by getting somebody genetic tested doesn't do any good because it doesn't change their treatment at all, which is just not true. Drug therapy could alter differently. Oh, you could actually save people's lives because, they're dying of dangerous arrhythmias, air quotes, heart attack. And I think also cardiology mindset is they're a little bit more less apt to change. And I hear that a lot for people that are in the cardiology community now that were in other sort of disease states area in the medical community. For some reason, that just is kind of the mindset in general. Not with the younger cardiologists, right? Not necessarily with cardiologists that are in major academic medical centers. But it needs to change. And we're also working on papers, to indicate, with hospital systems that, hey, you can make money if you start a cardiogenomics program, right? All the additional tests that you're going to do. Certainly, device companies are going to make a lot of money from putting ICDs in. Medical institutions, I think, heart institutions probably make their most money on putting devices in. Well, if you're diagnosed with a gene, about a third of the genes in cardiomyopathy that cause cardiomyopathy actually can cause arrhythmias. The insurers will actually pay to put an ICD in so you don't die. And so, I think one, we have to demonstrate that this is not, you're not going to lose money. You're going to actually make money on this. And then also, I think, there's going to be potential liability coming, people that die that weren't genetically tested when the guidelines say that they should and could have been prevented for genetic testing. I think you're going to see probably lawsuits in the future that, again, there's the carrot, you'll make more money, and then there's the stick, you potentially get sued if you don't provide, guideline, therapy to your patients or guideline recommended therapy to your patients.
I would say, and as somebody who's been in the cancer realm for a couple of decades, I guess at this point, that's kind of how it progressed, right? Is there was resistance at first, then it kind of started chipping away large academic centers. I think the challenge, and I think it's still a challenge on the cancer side too, is getting out into those community settings, kind of some more of the rural settings, right? Where maybe they just aren't aware that genetic testing is available or that genetic testing is potentially affordable more than it used to be.
It's not that expensive, actually. The prices are coming way down too. So.
And I think, like you said, there were governing bodies or accreditations that cancer centers could get. And part of that stipulation was providing genetic counseling and genetic testing, right, for patients to be able to get this accreditation.
And I think we'll get there. And what I'm trying to do is it will eventually get there, right? Yeah. But how many people have to die until we get there? So everything that we're doing is really try to compress those timeframes as much as possible.
Right. And get it so that you're at the same level, not 10 to 15 years behind.
Make it happen much faster.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Well, and so you mentioned a couple of things like that there was, maybe this confusion on sort of like, well, what can be done? But I think you've mentioned several different ways that if somebody's had genetic testing, okay, we've identified a change or a mutation, there's screening, there's treatment. There are things that can be done for genetic dilated cardiomyopathy.
We're working with about 12 companies right now that have genetic cardiomyopathy therapy pipelines. So one of the things is it's coming very soon in the next several years. So obviously, once you start getting therapies approved by the FDA, that you need to be genetically tested. And we're very close to that. Like we're on the edge with a bunch of companies that's coming. I think people will get tested because you will. If you know BRCA, you need to be aggressive, and you're going to get a certain type of treatment option, right? Mm-hmm. If you have another, oncology or cancer-based gene, it's they know what to do, and there could be potentially drug therapies that are available. So I think once those hit the market, and we're just a few years away from that, it will become a greater need for the reason to get potentially tested. So. I think I diverted from your question. If you want to ask that again, so
no, I think you covered it pretty well. That there are treatments available. So I don't know if you want to highlight any like specific preventions or treatments, because I think that's what's important to know is that even the patient in front of you, you're treating them with what you're seeing in clinic, but that genetic test could potentially either alter the treatment or change prevention for family members.
Yeah, and I think. Obviously, so treatment, having like an ICD or a shock wire so that if your heart goes into dangerous arrhythmia, it'll keep you alive, right? I had a couple of different ones over 7 years, and they kept me alive. Great. I wouldn't be here today without it. So if you are diagnosed with cardiomyopathy and you get a genetic test and it comes up positive and it's an arrhythmogenic gene, most likely they'll put an ICD in, which could save your life. And so that's a difference. Also, the aggressiveness and the types of drugs that they give you could alter a little bit. It's not hugely different. Again, I'm not a doctor, but it could alter. And when they start giving you the drugs, if you have an aggressive gene that tends to progress quickly, they're going to be more aggressive on the drug therapy very early in the disease onset, right? And so that's the other one. And again, obviously, if you have a genetic cardiomyopathy gene, no matter what it is, it's the guidelines again, and are that first degree relatives should be genetically tested. If another family has it and hasn't started the disease yet, they can be monitored to make sure that they can get an ICD if it's arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy or arrhythmogenic gene causing it. And number two, they can be monitored. So at the very earliest signs of disease progression, they can start a drug therapy. Because the sooner you start drug therapies and disease progression, the longer and healthier you're going to live with that disease.
One of the things I think that's very fascinating about your journey is you diagnosed, you've been on the patient side, you've had this experience sort of starting different endeavors, and it's clear that you're passionate about tackling access to care, testing, options, awareness for dilated cardiomyopathy. What has been one of the biggest challenges, I would say, as a patient, being a patient advocate?
Yeah, it's obviously testing. Well, it's getting people tested and getting the large genetic testing companies to get interested in genetic testing, because, and I kind of get it. I mean, they're for-profit entities, or the demand isn't there. So cardiologists aren't ordering the test. So it's very difficult for XYZ gene therapy company to put a lot of money in this, right? And because they're ordering oncology, even neurology, obviously preneonatal, right? They're all, oncology, preneonatal are the big ones, right? There's a lot of demand. And so, it'd be tough for a gene therapy company a genetic testing company to be able to put a lot of money in this when the demand's just not quite there yet. And you don't know when the demand will be there to order it on tests. So we're actually working on starting our own genetic testing company. I don't think I told you that. So we're raising money for that now, and we're pretty close to getting it done. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of taking the bull by the horns. And there's a lot of things that upset me and dismay me in the medical community right now. The medical community missed my disease for a long time, but then saved my life. I had a heart transplant 3 years ago with my disease. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a lot of good things and great things about the medical community in general and in the U.S., and there's a lot of really bad and yucky things, about the medical community and in the U.S. particularly, right? And so, what we're lucky enough to, in our board and people we know have been successful business folks that have the disease. And so we're working and we're getting, fairly close to starting our own genetic. And what we would do is provide free genetic testing for idiopathic diagnosed cardiomyopathy patients. There's probably 1 million of them out there right now. They're not getting tested because having to navigate insurance, having patients to be able to order directly. We're working with an organization that actually provides virtual genetic counseling. That's really important. So if you have a positive gene, what do I do next? And you really need to have a certified or licensed genetic counselor in cardiology to be able to give you that information. Honestly, the vast majority of cardiologists aren't going to know what you should do next. They just don't have the knowledge. So those are some of the things that we're doing. There also aren't enough cardiology genetic counselors in the United States. Mm-hmm. So I think I saw a thing from National Society of Genetic Counselors a few months ago that I think there's 7,361 or 7,631. There's about 7,500 licensed genetic counselors in the United States, but less than 400 in cardio. Mm-hmm. And so, as this ramps, as this grows, there just aren't enough cardiology genetic counselors. So, we have to figure out the use of AI. We're going to be very efficient. There's certain things, because it's going to be really, really hard. Maybe with some certifications, genetic counselors can move over from other disease states and pick up or get certified in the cardiology area. but there just aren't enough genetic counselors right now.
Well, and it sounds like, I think, cardiology is an area that hopefully, in terms of genetic counseling, genetic testing, on the precipice of maybe opening up, because you mentioned with some of the diagnostic companies and some of the medical, it's hard to get them to offer the testing because they don't necessarily see the demand. But then you say, there's probably 100,000 people each year that pass away that could have used this type of testing.
I mean, and in almost any other area, like this would be, we need to get somebody really famous to go on TV and like it's criminal, basically. Mm-hmm. That's not my number. That's from a device company. So
yeah, well, and I think that's what it's saying is, so there's this opportunity there, but it's still not where it needs to be in terms of getting the patients the care they need and giving them the option, having this discussion with them, because I think that's part of the challenge, and what I am glad to see about your organization and all the different things that you guys are doing, because this is definitely needed in this area.
I agree. It's desperately needed. And I kind of look back, I'm a kind of a targeted human being. And, I said, what can I do that potentially save the most lives the fastest? And I really focused on this genetic cardiomyopathy. And again, where we're just DCM, which is a part of cardiomyopathy, there's dilated, hypertrophic, arrhythmogenic, left ventricular non-compaction, and restrictive. And you might even add peripartum cardiomyopathy in there too. But, what we decided is that we all have to work together, the patient groups that represent these populations, to really raise the awareness. And also with genetic cardiomyopathy, when a gene mutates and causes disease, sometimes it turns into dilated, sometimes it turns into hypertrophic, sometimes it's arrhythmogenic. Or, with mine, Lamin A, created dilated cardiomyopathy and also the arrhythmogenic component also. So when you look at genetic cardiomyopathy, you really have to look at it on a cardiomyopathy-wide basis, not in one of the windows of dilated, hypertrophic, et cetera. There's a ton of overlap. And I think the more they learn, the more research, the more discover, the more overlap you're going to find.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so, and what would you say, that's kind of the challenge, is what would you say is the best part about working in this space? I think one is the challenge you gave yourself, how to save or impact the greatest number of lives. But what are some of the other things that you find rewarding about working in patient advocacy?
Again, I think that, I've talked to quite a fean heart transplant patients since I was transplanted. It's a pretty big deal. You're down close to death and then you survive. And, overcoming the surgery is a little bit difficult too. Yeah. But so it's great to have very rewarding discussions with patients one-on-one, and as they're going through the disease, and hopefully helping them deal with it and cope with it a little better, encourage them to do the right things, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and that's really rewarding. I know in our Facebook groups 4 years ago there was almost no discussion about genetics in it. We now know the woman that runs our Facebook group, Stephanie Fallon, has said, probably every 3 or 4 posts have something to do with genetics. So, us sort of, standing on the rooftop and waving the, genetic cardiomyopathy banner, I think is bringing it to the forefront, and hopefully, it's hard to quantify, hopefully we'll, progress the solution faster. And, the faster we do it, the more lives we're going to save. So the pay stinks, but that's
That's always the challenge when starting something new, especially in a nonprofit area.
Sure. You can't be in it to make money. So, yeah, but I'm 60 and I've had a business career, so I'm happy to, I'm done with all that, and I'm now, hopefully it's sort of a higher good here. So
I think there's something to that you were the person that took this and were able to now devote this amount of time and effort to it.
Yeah.
Well, and so we talked about a few different things. I think there's kind of a few things I'm wondering if you're going to say, but if people today listening to this, if they take away one thing, they only remember one thing from this conversation, what is it that you want them to walk away remembering?
Can I have 2?
Okay, you can have 2, I suppose.
2. So one, if somebody in your immediate family died young of a heart attack, seemingly healthy, right, whatever, go to a I would say if you go to a heart failure center, you can Google heart failure center near me. There's a bunch of them. Most, academic institutions would have heart failure centers as part of their heart hospitals, and sort of talk to somebody and get tested, genetically tested, get your heart looked at. Because when very healthy young people die, it's not right of a heart attack, and something is probably potentially something else. So that's one thing. Other thing that I see is if you have been diagnosed, obviously with cardiomyopathy, demand that you get, genetically tested from your cardiologist. A lot will refuse or don't know how to do it. You can go to our website, dcmfoundation.org or geneticcardiomyopathy.org, and we'll find you a pathway to get genetically tested. That's really, really important. So, and that could save lives. And I guess if there's a third, I never shut up. Don't ignore signs. If your heart's fluttering or arrhythmia, or you're feeling a lot more tired than you were previously, and it's not it's pretty quick, and it's not, you didn't gain 50 pounds, and you're sleeping fine, and or your heart's fluttering or arrhythmia, go to your cardiologist and get it checked out. Again, most of the time it may be nothing, but it's much better to be safe than sorry. So
yeah, definitely. And I think that's a good point, is that like that person said, you don't look like a typical heart failure patient that we would see, especially if there's something going on, but you're like, well, I'm physically fit, I'm doing what I need to be doing, I'm eating right. That's probably even more of a incentive not to blow it off and to go in and get something looked at.
Yeah, go get something looked at. And again, your best bet is to go to an academic medical center. They're most equipped to treat cardiomyopathy, and they're obviously best equipped to treat genetic cardiomyopathy too. So.
Well, and we'll link to the foundation's websites. And there was a few other ones I think that you mentioned as well. So we'll make sure we put those in the show notes. Really just appreciate you being here today, sharing your story, but also talking about the work of the DCMF.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you taking the time to have me on and being on the show. And again, if whatever we can do to save more lives, I know you're interested in that. I'm interested in that. It's a great thing. So, and if you have any questions, there's also info@dcmfoundation.org. If people are experiencing symptoms and they want to talk to somebody, we're happy to talk to them. So
perfect. Okay, we'll add that one too. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks, Kate. Have a great day.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. This link is also in the show notes for easy access. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/allaccessdna and consider donating to get bonus content, submit questions for our guests, and connect with other genetic curious individuals. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. All Access DNA is hosted, produced, and edited by Kate Wilson. The logo design is by Designs by NKJ. Thanks for listening, and join us next time.